Yep.
Yes, sir, please start.
All right. Well, a very good afternoon to all of you from Jaipur, and I'd like to welcome you all to this special webinar organized by GJEPC on the subject of colored gemstones. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rishabh Tongya, and I carry a beautiful smile, along being the co-founder of the jewelry brand Diacolor and a colored stone mining company called Gemrock. Well, thanks to the COVID lockdown, we're all getting to spend a lot of time with our families. And to be honest, we forgot the real luxuries of life over all these years in everyday's hustle and chase. So over a lazy lunch last week, I asked my father how it's that there are so many Indians in the gem and jewelry industry. I mean, you visit any trade show or any trading or procurement center, and you'd see an overwhelming majority of Indians. I mean, why, how? I've always been simply puzzled. Little did I realize that this chat is going to end all the way up to dinner, and my mom literally had to pull both of us out of it. It was a trip down the memory lane, and I've had him pen down a bit of history for all of us. Late 15th century saw the Mughals taking control of Greater India, and Spain and Portugal emerging as competing European naval powers trying to conquer new territories around the world. Pope divided the world along the Tordesillas meridian between these two countries for commercial exploitation and to avoid conflicts in Europe. The Spanish exploits of Colombia brought emeralds to the European ports, which were then bought by the Portuguese, who were the first Europeans to land in Goa, beginning of 16th century. Barter was the order of the day, and the Portuguese used emeralds to trade it with spices from India, which was highly sought after in Europe. India was the golden bird of that era, as we all know, and the Mughal became the world's largest connoisseurs of Colombian emeralds. This is all recorded history, and it all happened about 500 years ago, much earlier than a lot of countries being discovered, forget their constitutions being written. Like the Indo-Colombian trade, gemstones from several other countries, such as spinels from Tajikistan, also made their way to India, establishing it as the world's top consumer for gemstones. Fast forward 200 years, beginning of 18th century, the Mughal Empire began its decline, and the Rajput ruler, Maharaja Savai Jai Singh, just established his new capital, the city of Jaipur, adjacent to Amir. The Maharaja began courting different artisans of various trades and started settling them in Jaipur. Jewelry and gemstones was one of his favorite passions and possessions, and he dedicated one of the main avenues in the walled city as Johari Bazaar, or the Jewelers Bazaar. The foundation laid back then still serves as a marketplace for gem dealers, and over the last century has created thousands of dealers trading in over 100 variety of gemstones imported from all different corners of the world, representing the unwavering Marwari entrepreneurial spirit. Arriving to the 20th century, we saw the likes of Cartier traveling to Jaipur in pursuit of acquiring gemstones, and at the same time, seeing their Maharaja friends and clients who loved being dressed in gemstone necklaces set in Parisian style. The tradition continues till date, and several other brands and designers flock to Jaipur to source gemstones for the latest collection, and parallelly, the gemstone dealers from Jaipur traveled around the world to source tanzanite from Tanzania, garnets from Kenya, just to name a few, and thus creating Jaipur as the world's premier colored stone destination. This is how Jaipur became the colored stone capital of the world, and this is why the Indian community is so intertwined with jewelry, both as being suppliers to the world and consumers at large. So yeah, that is the Jaipur story, and now I'd like to move on introducing our panelists. I must say that we have an impeccable list of speakers who have not only excelled in their businesses and illustrious careers, but also upheld the old world ethics and best trade practices that has held our industry in such high esteem, where transactions are done merely on a word and a promise is a promise. Together, they've bought and sold billions of dollars of gemstones over the years, and several $100 million of gemstone pass through their eyes every year without fail. It has been my absolute pleasure in working with these fine gentlemen over the years, whom I call friends, and I welcome them to this webinar and thank them for their valuable time. So let me begin eastwards. We have Mr. Ephraim joining us from Hong Kong, who is the managing director of Dehres. As one of the most influential white and fancy color diamantes and gemstone specialists in the Far East, he is widely considered as an industry leader, known for his exceptional collection of white and rare fancy color diamonds, as well as rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. He has vast experience both within the industry and with end consumers. Having had 5 years of experience as a diamond cutter in Israel, Ephraim moved to New York, where he continued to develop his mastery of cutting large diamonds becoming one of the most highly skilled and sought after diamond cutters in town. In 1971, at the age of 25, Ephraim left New York for Hong Kong to set up and manage a joint family business, trading emeralds, rubies, diamonds, sapphires. In 1985, he founded his own enterprise named Dehres, an acronym of the initials of the Zion family members, symbolizing their unity and their respective share of involvement with the family business. Dehres was one of the pioneers in promoting large certified white and fancy color diamonds in Asia back in the early 70s. By the late 80s, Dehres had expanded its activities to the European and American markets as well. Today, the company is managed and run by 2 generations of the Zion family, continuing its legacy of trust, professionalism, expertise, and commitment to excellence through the fulfillment of its vision, value, and mission statement. I can personally add that knowing him and his family for all these years, he's an absolute gem of a person and an industry anchor who sets the benchmark for trade practices of our gem trade, and always a man willing to help out friends in our industry. For those of you who visit the Hong Kong show, there's the museum as soon as you enter the Grand Hall, and you must pay him a visit when you're there next to say hello. Coming to Geneva, we have Mr. David Bennett joining us from Sotheby's. Regarded internationally as an authority in the field of precious stones and jewelry, David Bennett has been an auctioneer for Sotheby's since 1978. He has presided over many record-breaking sales. Most recently, he orchestrated the historical sale of royal jewels from the Bourbon-Parma family, which established a new world record for a sale of royal jewels and antique jewels at $53.1 million and for a natural pearl at $36.2 million. We all know that made the world record. David has also presided over the sale of 3 out of the 5 most expensive jewels in auction history. These include the world auction record for any diamond or gemstone at $71.2 million, the CTF Pink Star, which is a fancy vivid pink diamond at 59.60 carats. He also set the world auction record price per carat for any gemstone at $48.6 million, which roughly translates to about $4 million a carat, for the Blue Moon of Josephine, a 12-carat fancy vivid blue diamond. In May 2016, David set the world record for any jewelry sale, achieving a record total of $175.1 million for Sotheby's sale of magnificent jewels and noble jewels in Geneva. He's known as the 100-carat man for the sale of 7 100-carat diamonds, each of which established record prices. And coming to our colored stone bit, in 2015 of May, he set 3 auction records with a sale of $30.3 million on the 25.59-carat Sunrise Ruby, the record price for a ruby and for a ruby per carat, as well as for a record price for a jewel by Cartier. David Bennett is also a co-author with Daniela Maschetti of the best-selling reference book Understanding Jewelry, in print since 1989. They also have co-written Celebrating Jewelry, published in 2012, and also in French as Célébration de Bijoux. Next, we have joining from UK is Mr.Steve Bennett, who is the chairman of Gemporia group of companies. He is the founder of Primal Cure, an initiative of generating awareness about well-being of human life, not only to add years in life, but also to add healthy life in these years. He is also the co-founder of Colorful Life Foundation, a philanthropic organization working in education and healthcare sectors in Africa, UK, and India. Steve founded his group of companies in the gemstone and jewelry industry in 2004 in the name of GemsTV. And since then, he's been popular among manufacturers as buyers as a truthful, committed, and an authentic business person. His passion to source, introduce, and provide genuine stones to end users is incomparable. His customers and business partners see him as a happy, healthy, fun-loving, smiling, respectable, and a multi-talented person to bank upon. He is a proud father of 7 children and a husband of beautiful and intelligent woman, Sarah Bennett, who supports all his endeavors. Steve has also written several books on gemstone world, business and leadership, health and lifestyle, and also about healthy food habits. He's the first businessman in UK who converted a family-owned business to employee-owned business. And moving on to London, we have Mr. Shaun Gilbertson. Of course, most of us here in Jaipur who works with Emerald and Ruby Duff know him very well, and he doesn't really need an introduction. But still, for the record, Shaun has graduated as a mining engineer from Wits University in South Africa. Having spent time in the country's deep-level gold and platinum mines, he then worked as a project financier for Deutsche Bank in Frankfurt and London, specializing in independent power projects and public-private partnerships. In 1998, he founded Global Coal, a company that played a central role in the commoditization of the thermal coal industry, and was appointed the chief executive officer in 2001 when the business was acquired by industry players including Anglo-American, BHP Billiton, Glencore, and Rio Tinto. He was also the co-founder for the pioneering Spectron Metals trading platform for Category 1 and 2 members of the London Metals Exchange. Shaun was a co-founder of the Palinger's Group in 2005 and was primarily responsible for Palinger's colored gemstone strategy from 2006 to 17. After the unbundling of the Palinger's Group in 2018, Mr. Gilbertson was appointed CEO of Gemfields Group Limited on 31st March 2018 and remains the CEO of Gemfields, Fabergé, and the Kanjim mine, on whose board he has served for more than a decade. Shaun is passionate about gemstones, Africa, aviation, nature conservation, and very much looks forward to an old-fashioned and a good bar once COVID-19 restrictions are lifted. Shaun, you have to invite me for that one, please. I must add, I've known Shaun for over a decade now, and he's an absolutely hardworking guy and a team leader with his organization. The vision between him and his father, Mr. Brian Gilbertson, has certainly changed the course of how rough emeralds and rubies are traded over the past decade. And under his watch, Gemfields has certainly positioned itself as the De Beers of the colored gemstone industry. Well, without taking further time, I'd love to begin our discussion, our Q&A. And I'd like to begin with you, Mr. Ephraim, given that the whole COVID situation has started in China. So how do you see the global pandemic has affected your business in Hong Kong? I mean, it's really affected all quarters of life and businesses. So how do you see its impact on colored stones in near and long term, sir?
Unfortunately, the impact is extremely negative since the beginning of the infection, starting in January, February. And, if you talk about the short term, near term, I think it's going to take a few more months until it will stabilize. Unfortunately, when I look at the Western countries, especially Western Europe, America, it doesn't look that the infection is doing much better than Hong Kong. In fact, albeit a little bit better. Unfortunately, still large swaths of infection all over the United States. And there's a big discussion, of course, whether they should open to go to work or whether they should stay at home. And when I see all this misery and all this pain and all this suffering, I think it's going to take a few more months, hopefully by the end of September, October, or even later. That's as far as the near term. We had a devastating effect on our business. We could hardly do any business. Actually, business even at the moment is very stagnant, despite Hong Kong being in a better position. As I told you before, Hong Kong has really gotten the situation under control. We have 1,050 cases of infections, while four deaths only. And despite the fact we are suffering from a tremendous shortage of tourists purchasing, and a lot of these hotels are empty. I mean, some hotels are working on between 5 to 10% occupancy rates. So the short term doesn't look so good. I must admit. Looking at the long term, and it's very, very difficult to establish what is the long term at the moment, because we are witnessing and we are experiencing something that we have never had before. This is unprecedented.
Right.
It's going to take a while. But once the authorities or the public is going to contain the infection, and once a vaccine is found, I believe that slowly, we're going to come back to normal. And I'll tell you, the effect in the long term on our business, on the colored stone, is going to be massively positive. I believe there's going to be, people will come back to buy colored stones with a vengeance. I truly believe this. It's just a matter of time, because because there's a lot of bottled up, a lot of pent up demand, and people at some point will come out of their shells once the situation stabilizes and the infection is contained. They're going to start buying, and this is without any doubt in my mind.
So you think post, give it another, 3 to 4 quarters, once, things start to stabilize, you see a demand back up and business will be as usual. That has been the case of the last few years.
Business will be much, much better. I wouldn't say usual because it will take a little bit more time to get better, but definitely we'll see a substantial improvement. And if we talk about next year, 2020, 2021, 21, 22, I'm very, very bullish, very optimistic, very hopeful for business to be even better than before.
Thank you. Your points well taken. And moving over to you, David, now. The first quarter, the first 6 months of the year has seen all your sales getting pushed. I mean, the May Geneva sales have been pushed. And so the business has obviously taken a big hit. So how do you see in the near term as well as the long term, the impact on the colored stone business as Sotheby's? And when can we expect to see a new world record from you?
Thank you for that confidence. Well, since March, it's been a huge learning process, obviously, for us, because the model of auction is where people sit in a room and bid or don't bid, or bid on the phone and so on. So this obviously was curtailed because you couldn't certainly hold auctions where people were assembling. What worked very well, and I think everybody on the panel will agree, was that we all learned, all my staff have been at home all over the world, working from their homes, and it's worked very well thanks to Zoom and other sort of processes like this. The problem, of course, particularly for coloured stones, while diamonds have certificates and so on, we've been doing some sales with white diamonds, for example. With coloured stones, particularly, of course, at the top level, it's almost impossible to trade with either to take them for sale without seeing them, or to sell them to people without showing them. So that's been a major challenge. But I absolutely agree with Ephraim that my experience has been that in tough times, I'm particularly reminded of the outbreak of the Gulf War. I'd just taken in a 100-carat deep flawless pear shape. It was the first one ever to be offered at auction. And I thought I just arrived in Geneva. I thought, oh, this is 1990. I thought, oh, I'll make a go for it. Why not? It's a wonderful thing. About a month after I took it in, Saddam invaded Kuwait. So I thought, well, that's the end of that. No, I had to go ahead. We all had to go ahead. So I had a couple of months to try and find a buyer. I started taking it around the world. Showed it to a Middle Eastern gentleman who expressed a great deal of interest. He'd been looking at for ages. So I started talking to him and asked the naive question, are you thinking of buying this for your wife? And he looked at me in absolute astonishment and said, no. So I said, are you buying because you think it's a good investment? He looked at me again in astonishment. He said, no. So I said, why? He said, how else can I put $16 million in my pocket?
Right.
And what that showed to me was that actually something that a lot of us forget when we worry about the gemstone and jewel industry is that it's probably the oldest sector where for 4,000 years it has been considered to be of high value. It's been collected, traded for 4,000 years consistently, despite depressions and so forth and so forth. So I absolutely agree with Ephraim. I think that what's happening now, particularly in the markets and so on, is going to get people like my Middle Eastern gentleman who bought the diamond to look at alternative, highly portable assets. And coloured stones, particularly, I think, are very, very undervalued. I mean, we were talking about the 30 million for the 25-carat ruby. But it wouldn't surprise me if that could be doubled in a few years' time. I mean, these things are so infinitely rare. You know, as we all know, 10 carat plus gem Burma ruby is various hen's teeth. It's certainly as rare, if not rarer than the rarest of coloured diamonds. But the public doesn't yet know that. In order to desire something, you've got to know it's there. But a very wise man telling me that the first blue diamond I sold, he said, look, it's important that we have these on the market regularly, at least once a year. Because otherwise people forget about them. Right? You're not going to see a decent blue diamond, even in a jeweller's window very often. So I think it's important that we have these headline sales to make this desire for these objects so great. But I'm very positive about it. Absolutely. I think the conditions, like Ephraim has just said, I think the conditions are absolutely set up for
so I'm sure when you speak with that confidence, that would certainly exude, confidence in all of, the trader community at large. And moving on to you, Shaun, on the same question, how do you see your business, your, rough mining and rough selling business has been affected? The Jaipur traders are seeing a bit of, liquidity crisis given, the global situation. So how do you see the impact of the, the COVID-19 on your business in the short term as well as the long term basis?
Thank you, Rishabh. At the moment, I think for all intents and purposes, much of the industry hangs in suspension. And we have, in the last 24 hours, advised our auction customers that our next auctions for emeralds and rubies respectively are presently scheduled to take place in October and November of this year. Now, those auctions would have taken place had it not been for our neighborhood bug in May and June of this year. In other words, we're talking about auction delays of 5 and perhaps 6 months. Now, that's a very serious suspension of business for any company to have to endure. And if one thinks that Gemfields has annual revenues of a little north of 200 million, during the course of 6 months, one should get revenues of half that, 100 million. And at the moment, we're not going to get that. So that's a very, very significant aspect that needs to be dealt with. In addition, the mining operations, both the Kagem Emerald Mine in Zambia and the Montepuez Ruby Mine in Mozambique, are presently suspended as a result of the local situation and, of course, the states of emergency that are in effect. That's a very difficult thing, obviously, for many of our colleagues to have to deal with. We have to date not made anybody redundant, so we're trying to deal with that as best we can. There is also an opportunity loss of revenue in the case of Montepuez, the Ruby Mine, for example. For every month that you're not actually physically mining, you are foregoing somewhere between $8 and $11 million of rubies per month that you're not going to have in stock at a later stage when you need them. Similarly, at Kagem, the opportunity loss of revenue every month runs to about $6 or $8 million per month. So those are very significant issues. Fortunately, and with enormous credit to the 2,500 men and women who work for Gemfields, the group was in a fairly good position at the back end of December 2019, and provided these delays and the suspension of the industry doesn't last beyond 5 or 6 months, I think everything should be fine. I do think in the medium term, it's going to be a pretty slow walk out of the trenches as everybody gets moving again. Obviously, we are not able to host auctions until such time as people can freely get on aeroplanes and travel. And I think there probably are some encouraging signs of what has been dubbed in the media of pent-up demand or revenge spending, where people who have been locked up for a long period of time have in some respects sort of missed their ability to have freedoms, to live freely, to love freely. And I suspect there probably is a good chance that when people are again given that opportunity, they will want an emotional talisman or a marker that reminds them of what it means to live and love freely. So we're certainly at 6, 7, 8 months from now, I think things will be largely returned to regular business. But the other observation, Rishabh, obviously, is that there still remains so much uncertainty, and there's so much about the virus that we still don't know. And it doesn't cease to amaze me how people quote the statistics and the fatality rates, when in reality, all of the facts are, or the figures that we're presented with, really mean very little. Different countries collect them on a different basis. There's so much data that's not going to those facts and figures. And that, unfortunately, I think it's just going to be a waiting game.
So I see a sense of pretty confidence from your end, Shaun, given that, you as a company have been in a position to announce the date in the last quarter of the year. So hopefully things should return, to somewhat normal by then, and we should be able to carry on our businesses. Now, moving on for the same question to you, Steve, I must say that, I'm very envious of your position. You run your business on an online platform where, your clients are still able to run their business, see your products. And so how do you see the impact, on the COVID in terms of the consumer spending? Are they still buying by you? And how do you see their, their behavior towards, consumption for gemstone jewelry in particular?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for hosting this event. I think it's a great idea. At the beginning, it was no problem for mail order. In fact, you've got more people sitting at home waiting to watch the shows and see the product. Our real problem came really the last 3 or 4 weeks as we ran down the stock, and trying to get stock out of Jaipur and India obviously has been very, very challenging. So we're struggling a bit more now than we did at the beginning. But we're obviously in a very strong financial position, so we're not overly concerned. Are things getting back to normal? We've just started to have our first few deliveries come out of Jaipur. China's ramped back up, so no problems there. We've got some small bits coming out of Thailand. So all in all, from our business, it'll be fine. What's the long term look like? I think that we're going to see very different landscapes moving forward. I think what this has taught so many families and so many people is different priorities, different looking at spending their money in different ways. So in the UK, where do people spend their disposable income? Restaurants, traveling. Well, we're not going to restaurants, we're not traveling, and we're all still quite happy. So and also technology, we spend a lot of money on technology, but we're seeing mobile phone sales slow down as the differences between this one and the next one aren't as great. So people aren't updating their phones and iPads as often. So that leaves me in a belief that they will be looking for other things to spend money on. And as long as we as an industry keep coming up with new gemstones, new stories, keep traveling to these distant communities and telling their stories through the gemstones, I think the whole thing looks healthy in the long term. How long is short term, long term, medium term? Nobody knows. I'm so close to COVID with my other business, which is a health business. I'm conferencing doctors probably 3 hours a day at the moment. It's not going to be about a vaccine, I don't personally think. It's not really going to be about vaccines. It's not going to be about testing. It's about sorting out the global sort of white elephant in the room, which is an underlying health problem we've got in the Western world of chronic diseases due to the wrong food choices. And if you look at who's suffering with COVID, it tends to be certainly hospitalization, chronic, and sadly death is those with underlying medical conditions, which are nearly all caused by wrong food choices. So we've got to sort that out first, and that will be the way we beat COVID in the long term. But how long it's going to be around, I don't know. I mean, how long till I fly to Jaipur, I don't know. I'll be the first one on the plane, trust me.
Well, I'll take the same plane all the way back to London, Steve. That I promise you. Moving on to our next question, I'd like to come back to you, Ephraim. The rich, they say that, the rich would remain rich and the poor, are really going to, get struggling a lot. How do you see, in that context, about the middle class? Because, the price brackets from $10,000 to $50,000 or even $100,000 in that aspect, for fine jewelry is what is being perceived as is going to be, the hit hardest. So how do you see that, the consumer preference and spending pattern is going to change, post the COVID era? Any particular category that you would still see will be in high demand and it would be relatively price resistant?
I think in regard to the middle class, I'm a little bit sorry to say that the middle class more or less has been decimated. Their salaries over the last 25, 30, 35 years have definitely not kept up with inflation. And their income is really much less than what used to be. And it will influence and it will impact their spending power. And I believe that they will go for lower quality. They will not stop buying. Obviously, if they used to buy, let's say, something for $5,000 or $10,000, today they'll probably go down to $2,000 or $3,000. Or if they need to buy an engagement ring, whether it's a sapphire, a ruby, or a diamond, they're going to still buy. They're not going to shy away from not buying, definitely. So hopefully, I don't have to tell you about the inequality gap, the income gap between the rich and the poor. We all know that this is a very high point of friction.
Right.
This really causes a lot of frustration and resentment and anger and demonstrations all over the world. We have pretty much a lot of problems.
Hopefully, so, we look forward that, people, they start, somebody was spending $10,000, if they continue to spend $3,000 or $5,000, as long as, that they're out there and they're buying, at least the business would be there,
That's exactly that. But irrespective of that, I was going to add that whatever these people buy less, it's going to be compensated by the people who've got more money, who will buy much more. And that means the well-to-do, the people who have no more, let's say, less alternative sources of investment. Because if you look now, even real estate is in the doldrums. People who bought houses, buildings, and offices are all suffering. They're all hemorrhaging. And so I see that our business, whether color stones or diamonds, will definitely be a positive thing. And they'll probably switch to this kind of investment alternatives rather than stay in their usual investments. So this would be a good development.
Thank you, Ephraim. And moving to you, David. You've obviously set world records, with your ruby and with the blue moon. But how do you see things from an auction perspective when it comes to consumer preference and spending pattern? How do you see this going forward? David, I think your microphone's on mute.
I think it's awfully difficult to predict clearly, but if you want a personal opinion, I suspect the next couple of years, actually rather agree with Ephraim again, I think it's going to be more and more polarized. I think the top end, the very rare stones, the specimen stones, the great emeralds, the great rubies, the great sapphires, are likely to get stronger because that part of the market is not going to be, unfortunately, it's the less well off that are going to be most affected by the economic results of this virus. But the rich classes are likely to still be wanting to seek, as I say, portable, alternative forms of investment, and coloured stones fit into that perfectly. And I think the other thing that's going to happen is that as in the last few years, Europe and the Middle East have become quieter in terms of the market, I think that the international gemstone market will become more and more focused on the emerging, of the emerging markets in Southeast Asia, and of course the secure Chinese, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan I think that is going to be, what I've noticed is that the buyers are becoming more and more informed every year, which is great. I'm all for that. I'm very keen on education, but I think the more you know about something, the more interesting it becomes. So I think the industry should spend more time educating its public about coloured gemstones, particularly, and I think that's what what Gemfields does a lot of, because there is a huge, particularly I've noticed in mainland China now, a lot of interest in education and knowing more. And I think that's really where we need to focus to develop our industry and secure it for the future.
So it's good to hear those optimistic words from you. And moving on to you, Shaun, again, speaking from the Jaipur and the Bangkok-based manufacturers of emeralds and rubies, from their perspective, how do you see it? Do you see any particular, do you see a bigger impact on the lower-end goods and the mid-core goods, or any particular category that you see is going to be hit harder, or where you see less demand from their perspective?
Good question, Rishabh. Obviously, again, very difficult to make forward-looking projections and predict how the future is going to pan out. I would have thought, echoing some of the comments we've already heard this morning, that the hit to the lower end of the market may be a little bit more severe than it might be at the top end. And I think that is partly reflected in the fact that Fabergé, from our perspective, has seen in the last 3 or 4 weeks a really marked increase in the number of inquiries for bespoke pieces, where people are involved in helping to create an item of more significant value. A number of those are north of $100,000. So I do think that's an interesting trend, and that kind of comes back to this emotional talisman or marker, where people are saying, let's find a way to remember what it means to live and to love freely. So at a guess, I would say we're going to see more of an impact on the low end of the market, and probably a little bit less, if not an increase in demand, at the higher end of the market. We've had in the Q&A section this morning, there's one question about what do we expect to happen to things like the rough pricing of emeralds and rubies. In reality, we certainly wouldn't expect to see a drop in those for 2 reasons. Number one, the supply isn't coming out of the ground right now. And secondly, obviously, Gemfields will do everything that it can to act responsibly vis-a-vis its existing customers and to protect market pricing. So keep them crossed.
Moving on to you, Steve. So we really have a very interesting panel here. We've got David and Ephraim, who sell one piece for millions of dollars. And then we have you, who sell, one piece, several thousands of one model for, a few dollars. So at the end, it still makes up the same numbers. So how do you see, from your perspective, Steve? I mean, how do you see, the change in, consumer behavior, any particular pattern that you see, or any particular price ranges that you see are doing okay?
I'm laughing because your point is so valid. We were in a Lawrence Graff store just before lockdown, looking at a very, very expensive piece. And my wife turned to me and she said, "My God, we have to work so hard to do that much revenue." So you're right. I have to ship out my warehouse close to 10,000 items a day to do 100 million turnover. Look, the key thing is, we're all selling the same thing, but just different, obviously, qualities, different customers. And I think you need all parts of the market to work cohesively, because brilliant comment about the high-end stuff, about people, they want education, they need education. We have a phrase, the more you can tell, the more you can sell. That's why literally before lockdown, I was in the Himalayas, in Nepal, trying to find kyanite, but not really trying to find it, just telling the stories and making the documentaries. I agree. Probably the middle market's going to be the most hit. The bottom end of the market, the $200, $300 product, I think will probably go up once supply is there, simply because less people spending it on technology, less people spending it on holidays, less people spending it on restaurants. So I think the bottom end will be fine. I think the top end will be fine. And you're probably right. The bit in the middle is going to probably be the hardest bit.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Now, my next question is, the central banks around the world, they're printing currency left, right, and center. We just read and heard that in US, they distributed about $2-3 trillion, and another round of sort of funding is in place. So how do you see the store of value in colored gemstones, as compared to other assets such as gold, diamond, or art? I mean, gold is $1,700 an ounce, and we're all reading in the news that it's going to hit 3,000, in a couple of years. So how would you say, Mr. Ephraim, how do you see, store of value in colored stones? It's going to go low, it's going to get lesser. A $100 ruby today is going to get, worth 50 tomorrow, or it's going to, keep up with inflation and, the global economies?
I think on the contrary, I think the value will be retained. I believe that you cannot compare the store of value of colored stones to gold, for example. Because when people buy colored stones, whether it's ruby, emerald, or sapphire, or paraiba, or pataraja, they buy it based on beauty, based on emotions. And gold is mined and it's sold for investment purposes only, as a store of value, and so on and so forth. But precious stones, especially rubies, emeralds, and sapphires, are bought for the beauty, for the emotional effect, and by the way, also for the value, for the appreciating value over the years. And to make my points, and there are no less than diamonds, by the way. I mean, fancy color diamonds. I mean, when I used to sell rubies and emeralds and sapphire back about 50 years ago, I can tell you, a 5-carat size ruby that used to be $2,500 to $3,000 a carat. I'm talking about fine ruby, okay? Today is $500,000, if not 600,000, or even 700,000. Or if you take a sapphire, let's take a Ceylon sapphire, for example, that used to be $1,000, $1,200 a carat for 15, 16, 20-carat sizes. Today are selling for $25,000, $30,000, even $45,000, $50,000 a carat.
Right.
So my view, and emerald is even worse. When you take an unoiled emerald, my gosh, look at the record prices. Even Afghanistan had a record price of $224,000 a carat a few years ago, 2015 to 2016. And not to talk about the Rockefeller Emerald, which was sold for $305,000 in an auction a few years ago. So my view is that colored stones will remain not only an object of beauty and admiration and decoration and ornament, but also an object of store value as well as a financial security. You have to understand, I'm not so sure about the Western Hemisphere, but people here in the Far East in America, and rather in Asia, whether it's China, whether it is Hong Kong, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, they buy diamonds and precious stones, colored stones, rubies, because they love it and because they look at it as a financial security and an asset preservation.
So more than just an investment, it is also about a variable art that you enjoy, not just, sort of save it in your bank.
That's why I think it's closer to art than gold or even than diamonds.
So moving the same question to you, David, in a slightly different way. We've seen, the auction world record selling sales. We heard about the Salvador Mundi that got sold for $500 million. While gemstones, for some reason or the other, 50 million, 60 million, and still looks like a stretch. Why is it that you think there is such a price discrepancy today between fine art and fine, fine jewels or fine gemstones? There is almost a 10x price difference in that. So if you can share your thoughts on that, David, please. David, you're on mute again. If I may ask you to unmute it, please.
Well, we've been doing our best to try and push the prices always quite successfully. But I think the biggest problem was illustrated to me, funny enough, when I was selling another ruby a while ago, which eventually made a record price. And I was showing it to a client of mine who's a big jewelry collector. And I said, I've got something wonderful to show you. So I showed it to him. He said, it's a ruby. I said, yes. But I mean, it's not just a ruby. It's a fabulous ruby. He looked at me and said, Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know about ruby. I don't know anything about them. I said, well, look, this is one of the best I've ever seen. He said, now that's what I need to know. Because he said, if you think it's one of the best, you know, I trust you, sort of thing. You know what I mean? I think our biggest problem is that coloured gemstones do not have, some of my colleagues will probably think this is a horrible idea, but with something, you know, the holy grail for the sale of coloured gemstones would be the equivalent of a colour grading that was universally accepted and so forth. In some ways, it's for the industry, it's good. It doesn't. In other ways, it's bad, because when you're thinking of investing, you know, $8–10 million in a coloured gemstone, you've got to feel that you can trust the person who's selling it to you. You know, and that's the problem. It's not just, it's not like having a GIA certificate saying vivid pink, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't exist. So it brings back to my point again. We have to educate our public. You have to educate them not just about what to look for, but also, you know, what is available. What does that? It's just so difficult. You know, we would all agree on the panel what a great 10-carat Burma ruby looks like, you know, pigeon by whatever. But you try and communicate that to a private individual is very, very difficult. Even the grading for pigeon's blood, you know, has been up for a certain amount of variable. But you can see that when it was brought out, how quickly the market latched onto it. You know, it was like, you know, all of us remember when the first type 2A gradings came in, you know, and it suddenly became so successful that it's very difficult to sell a white diamond without one. I think we need to get our ducks in a row, educate our public, not to be scared of demystifying it. Because otherwise they're going to have to simply rely on great experts like Ephraim for his opinion about how good a particular stone is. You know? So it's a bit limiting.
Thank you. I think you mentioned very correctly, you know, I mean, colored stones are not as categorized, they're not as standardized as diamonds. And that is why there is such a difference. I mean, when I sit with my father and, you know, we speak about an emerald and there is a 30% price difference where I find it lower, he tells me, you know nothing about the business, you're born yesterday, you know, so that's how he goes about it. Moving on to my next question, Shaun. You've got your mines in Zambia for emeralds and rubies in Mozambique. Now, industry-wide, from consumer perspective, there is a more bias towards Colombian emeralds as compared to Zambian, and towards Burmese when it comes to rubies. How is it that you plan out the whole, you know, the origin part? I mean, how as a company, how as an organization, where you are the market leader, how do you defend that position and try to encourage the consumers to try and get involved with these two origins of emeralds and rubies?
A very good and famous and infamous question, Rishabh. Thank you very much. One of the key differences, of course, is the fact that the mines in Burma, and particularly in Colombia, have hundreds of years of history. They've been around for a long time, and therefore they come with a lot of history, heritage, legacy, and legend. Those are good things. They're great stories, to Steve Bennett's point, that you can tell the consumers about the gemstones. The difference, of course, is that the African supply, which obviously has, fortunately, over the last 10 years, come to dominate supply of emeralds and rubies, is much younger. The Kajam emerald mines started in the late 80s and didn't really get going until sort of the middle of the year 2000. And so it's a very different picture. It's a very different challenge. And it's a story of different markets. We saw some fascinating figures last week from Guild Laboratories in a presentation to China, where Mozambican rubies and Zambian emeralds are remarkably dominant in terms of the gemstones going into China and passing through the laboratories. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I think in the case of Mozambican ruby, it was 69 or 70% of the rubies going into China came from Mozambique. So quite remarkable. The key thing is, how do you explain that to consumers? So that's the nub of your question. How do you get a consumer to think about the difference between Colombian emeralds, which are hundreds of years old, and Zambian emeralds, which have been around for 30 years? And the answer that I like to give to people is, think about different forms of art. On the one hand, your Colombian, you might associate with Caravaggio, with Rembrandt, artists who go back hundreds of years. Whereas the new kids on the block, the Zambian gemstones, the Zambian emeralds, the Mozambican rubies, those are your much more modern artists. So let's go for Basquiat, let's go for Jeff Koons. That's the difference. They're different, they have different virtues of value, different virtues of beauty. And at the end of the day, that's the great thing about our product. It comes down to the beauty that is in the eye of the beholder.
Extremely well. I was waiting for you to mention of Jeff Koons, given the poodle he sold for, $90 million or so in New York. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your, we're running short of time and I'm getting constant messages from, the team from GJEPC that you have to rush. So I have to cut short on the other questions. We also have joining today on the panel are two gems of Jaipur gem industry. Mr. Nirmal Bardiya, who is the regional chairperson for Rajasthan region of GJEPC, and Mr. Vijay Kedia, who is the convener of the Colored Gemstone panel. I welcome them both. And I request Mr. Bardiya if he could share some light on GJEPC, because we have a lot of sort of viewers joining in from overseas as well. And also tell them about GJEPC's towards the COVID fight. So over to you, Mr. Bardiya.
Thank you, Rishabh. The Gem and Jewelry Export Promotion Council is an apex trade promotion body in India working under supervision of Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Government of India having more than 6,500 members across India, representing all verticals like diamonds, gemstone, jewelry, etc. The council was set up in the year 1966 at Jaipur and now having its head office in Bombay with 5 regional offices spread across the country to cater the various gems and jewelry clusters. As we all know that due to COVID, the gem and jewelry industry was completely shut for nearly 6 weeks with no manufacturing activity happening nor exports. However, we are optimistic about the business as after almost 6 weeks, the state government has given permission to start operation of gem and jewelry units in Jaipur, Bombay, Surat and other places. These units have become operational complying with the guidelines laid down by the governments. The industry is thankful to the state and central government as this would allow us to fulfill the export that we are pending from pre-lockdown period and take new orders. And we are also thankful to our dynamic chairman, Parmodji Derewala from Jaipur for his constant efforts for the industry. GJEPC has been in touch with stakeholders and members through a series of webinars. This has been help us in reviewing the situation, sharing knowledge, contemplating and implementing measures to adapt to new way of doing business. GJEPC has allotted a fund of rupees 50 crores, US dollar about $6.5 million to help the needy workers of the industry impacted by COVID-19, of which rupees 21 crore rupees, US dollar 2.75 have been contributed to PM Care Fund for enabling government to fight in the crisis. I know that at the point of time, everybody is worried about the future and business prospectus. But I would like to say that we have seen global recession in 2008 and have recovered from it. Similarly, these difficult times would be over soon if we concentrate on our strength to capture available opportunities. Thank you. Thank you, Rishabh.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bardiya, for your thoughts on GJEPC and mentioning that they've contributed about $6.5 million, which is quite a significant contribution. Well, moving on to Mr. Kedia, I'd request if you can also share, throw some light on the current state of the rough market from a trader's perspective. Of course, he needs no introduction. He's a man full of color and humor. And over to you, Mr. Kedia. So please share your thoughts.
Yeah, hi, Rishabh. Thank you. And thank you for all the speakers who give the good advice and information. And I hope all the audience will follow and all our audience will be the positive. As mentioned, Rishabh, Jaipur has the hub for the gemstone since centuries. It is considered to be one of the finest cutting center for emerald, tanzanite, tourmaline, amethyst, topaz, and many other gemstones. Over the year, the color gemstone industry has expanded on a large scale. They have incorporated semi-automatic polishing machine and other modern technology into their setup. Gradually, the industry is moving upward to the value chain of the colored gemstone. Many unit manufacturing studded jewelry with colored gemstone are coming up in the Jaipur. Currently, more than 300,000 workforce is involved in colored gemstone industry, directly and indirectly. The workforce involved in this industry need not panic about the current situation. Since colored stone has always been considered a precious commodity, which is not only rare, but also made affordable with its use, like the John and Shaun already told these things. Expanding to jewelry made in all metals. Even though there are many varieties of colored stone available to us, there are some stones like emerald, ruby, tanzanite, sapphire, morganite, sevorite, which are available in fewer quantity as they are mined from limited location, thus making them rare. Even tanzanite have only one mine. Diamond people say, how does these things? But tanzanite is the rare to rare. So I say the all color stone is the rare. Our Prime Minister has announced $280 billion to support and uplift the Indian economy, which will help many from our industry to not only cope, but also flourishing during these times. The Indian manufacturers have sufficient stock of both rough and finished color gemstone to fulfill the demands for at least next few months. Now that the lockdown has been relaxed in India, operation of manufacturing units have begun. The cutting and polishing of rough gemstone has started, which will certainly help in fulfilling the requirements of the jewelry industry across the globe. I am involved in supply of rough gemstone for more than 30 years. I have been traveled often to almost all rough supplying countries like Brazil and other African countries. And my interaction with many counterparts in these countries suggests that the mining activity in some of these countries have started, resulting in new stock of rough gemstone ready for sale. As soon as international travel starts, these rough stone can be made available for the manufacturers, and finished stone and jewelry can be supplied to the buyer. The buyer can also come to India. Thus, the market can come its normal position, and I hope we will do more business than the before. Thank you, Rishabh.
Thank you, Mr. Kedia, for sharing your thoughts and your perspective on the colored gemstone industry. I would now like to open the floor for the audience who have questions for our panelists. I'm afraid we are short of time. So Nitin, over to you if you can plug them through. And I just request if you can just take the maximum 2 questions for our panelists. Over to you, Nitin.
Yeah, thank you, Rishabh, for after this wonderful session. I am asking some questions which has been come in the question and answer tab, which is visible to all the speakers as well. So first, I can take a question of Mr. Akshat Kapoor. We can take his question on voice. I am allowing him to talk so that he can unmute himself and just ask his question. Mr. Akshat?
Yeah. Hi, good evening, everybody. It's an interesting panel and a great insight in the, the trade and the future, what it holds for us. I am Akshat. I work as a publicist and I represent a couple of luxury fashion and jewelry brands across India. I work out of New Delhi. So my question is to Mr. David Bennett. Well, there are many established platforms for, established brands. I'd like to know that what does the future hold for unbranded jewelry? As in, would there be newer platforms that will be introduced for unbranded jewelry, or what does the future hold for that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, isn't it? Clearly, we've been migrating a lot of our live auctions to online auctions with massive success, actually, to a great surprise to me. We're having a sell-through rate in the 90%. Sales are coming in, netting well over the high estimate. So, and a lot of these pieces are not branded. I mean, they're just pieces of jewelry, well designed, well, nice quality. And I guess in general, somewhere between 10 and 150,000, that would be the sweet spot. I think, first thing, I think that, you know, that what has to happen is that the industry, the design, the manufacturing industry has to keep abreast of the quickly changing fashions in jewelry. And I think, you know, it's not going to be possible, I don't think, just to sell anything. It's going to have to be up to date and fashionable. But I think as long as the industry is versatile and quick-footed, I think I, for one, would be pretty positive about it. Does that answer the question? I'm not quite sure.
Thank you, Mr. David.
Yes, it quite does.
I sort of went off piece.
The future sort of looks promising. Thank you.
Well, I think so, yeah. And I think, as I said, I think largely the growth is going to come from Asia.
Thank you, Mr. David. Now I am taking a question from Mr. Steve. Mr. Manas Kala has asked this question, and I will myself post this question for Steve. How to increase the ticket size of the items sold online, as the pieces sold are usually low in value?
Oh, I don't know whether that's a question or an answer. If you've got the answer, let me know. Please tell me. I think, look, the key thing is from my point of view, we've got to get better at spreading the story about gemstones. You know, if you go back in history, grandparents would be talking to their children about kings and queens, and the stories were there. And in the younger generation at the moment, the stories just aren't there. You can ask kids at school age about a ruby and sapphire, they just don't know. So we have to find a way of getting stories of gemstones back on the agenda somehow. And of course, that's partly where we fit in with that, with our online and TV. But as an industry, and thanks to Gemfields for being, one of the few that are still putting adverts out about coloured stones. But as an industry, we have to keep telling the story so there is a demand. And we had a good comment a moment ago about tanzanite. But if we stop telling the story, then the demand will dry up. There'll always be a demand at the top end for the big rubies, the big sapphires, and the big emeralds. But if we stop telling the story, certainly down the lower end, then all we'll do is drive the ticket price down. Whereas if we can, one of the reasons I went to the Himalayas 2 months ago was to tell the story about kyanite. And case in point, you know, we've doubled our ticket price on kyanite since that visit. So yeah, it takes work, it takes time, but it's all about telling the story.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Nitin. And we're unfortunately constrained by time. Steve, you mentioned about stories, and the last leg, you know, of our webinar this evening. You know, we've talked about substance, and moving on towards the last leg, I'd like to talk about the glamour quotient of a gemstone and jewelry industry. You know, from the glitzy Ginza district in Tokyo to Bollywood in Bombay, or the red carpet at Cannes and the rodeo drive in LA, no stardom or no, you know, I mean, no stardom is, or opulence is complete without a deck of gemstone jewelry adorning a pretty face. Our trade oozes glamour and induces romance, drama, jealousy, and numerous stories throughout the history on which scripts could be written forever. So on that note, I'd request our panelists to please share with our audience their version of the stories, you know. I mean, one memorable moment or an exciting story that you could share on colored stones. It could be an acquisition, surprise from a flea market, bringing a smile to a client, or buying trip to a source country gone dud, you know. So Steve, if I may start with you, since you mentioned about the storytelling part.
Yeah, oh, crikey. Well, let's go to the recent one. So we're up in the Himalayas, literally 2 weeks before lockdown. We were looking for kyanite. We were 4,000 meters above sea level. And I met a family that were mining that had never left the valley. They didn't know what the internet meant. They'd never seen a car. They'd never seen a fridge or a freezer. And but their family for 3 generations have been mining kyanite. And I don't know, we just have to, I think one of the positives of this whole COVID is, certainly in the UK and certainly other countries I've been talking to, we're getting stronger at communities. So let's build those community stories into the stones. You know, kyanite is a beautiful gemstone high up in the Himalayas, and yet the people that mine it don't even know what the internet is. And I think some of the values, I actually met a gentleman who thinks is over 120 years old up at the mine, and and doesn't know what McDonald's is. So I think there's a lesson around that as well. But for me, it is all about the story. And yes, there's the glamour of the red carpet, and yes, there's a glamour of you know, Gstaad in Switzerland and places like that. But for me, the real glamour is with a community high up in a mountain, looking at coloured stones over a flame at night. That's the magic for me.
Thank you, Steve, for sharing those moments with us. Moving on to you, Shaun, I see a beautiful woman in green at your background. So we'd love to hear your version with a bit more schmooze and shebang. Please go ahead.
Unfortunately, I've not had the privilege of actually meeting the lady behind me for obvious reasons. You know, to echo Steve's point, the magic and the adventures are so rich in our business that Gemfields is currently working on a project to identify a journalist who would write purely a collection of wonderful stories about the real individuals in our industry and the great stories that they can share with us over the last 60, 70 or 80 years. So watch the space. I guess one of the sort of highlight experiences that I've had in our industry takes me back about 8 or 10 years when a colleague and I were flying a light aircraft in Mozambique. We were on our way to go and see the Coamba rubellite garnet mine. And unfortunately, the weather turned pretty foul. We couldn't reach anybody on the radio. We diverted to another runway, which was marked on the map and also on the GPS. After 15 minutes, we were overhead that runway, and unfortunately, it no longer existed. It must have been a 20 or 25-year-old map and still displayed on the GPS for some reason. And the weather by this point was very foul, and unfortunately, well, we had to make the tough decision to put the aeroplane down on a village road, very narrow village road. We had to practice the approach 2 or 3 times because there were trees at the beginning and the end that posed something of a risk. And you know, my palms are just getting sweaty telling the story because it's an interesting one now, but it certainly wasn't funny at the time. We managed to put the aeroplane down. We did take out the wingtip light on one of the bushes. And by the time we'd come to a halt on this tiny village road, you know, hands and knees shaking, and we calmed down a little bit. We had to try and work out what was in store for us overnight. And we put a couple of markers out both sides of the airplane in case some vehicles came along. And then we started rummaging around to see what we had in terms of supplies in the aeroplane for a romantic dinner of 2 with an incredible number of mosquitoes. And after we rummaged around in the back of the aeroplane, all that we could find was a bottle of grappa and a packet of ginger nut cookies. Wonderful experience, nice story now, but at the time, certainly nerve-wracking.
So I'm sure, you know, when the colored gemstone industry is going to look for an Indiana Jones version, we're going to reach out to you. Thank you, Shaun. Moving on to you, David, you know, you've worked, you know, with the auction house for such a long time. And I'm sure, you know, you must have had stories where you bought a ruby or a sapphire for, you know, literally no money that got sold for millions. So please do share your version of us, of a colored stone troist, please.
I wish that were true. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm just reminded, I mean, we talked a lot about the Sunrise Ruby. I just thought I'd give you a quick angle at what happened. The thing about selling these world record stones is that it gets publicized all over the world, and immediately you get, you know, a little lady in Boston who sees a pink diamond sold and brings up, oh, I've got a pink diamond like that, and so on and so on. So you get hundreds. Well, in 2014, I just sold the Graf Ruby. Do you remember the Graf Ruby? The 8-carat flame for $1 million a carat. It was a sensational stone.
Right.
And about a month later, this lady rings up my assistant and says, oh, would you tell Mr. Bennett I've got a better one? So I thought, oh God, okay. And it was a certain country in Europe I went to where, so a couple long story short, I fly out there expecting to see, you know, a tie, whatever. And I sit down with the lady, we talk about everything else but the jewelry. And I'm thinking, at what point can I say, can I have a look at the ruby? You know? And I'm sitting opposite across the table, and she pulls out the thing that in my 44 years, I think has to be the jaw dropper. Afterwards, she told me, you took the ruby, you said nothing for 22 minutes. You said, I was timing you. What? So what were you thinking about? So I was wandering around the house, looking at it in different lights and so forth, as one does, you know, the electric light, under this and that and the other. I remember thinking, first one is, how is it possible a stone like this exists? I don't know about it. You know, it's just like coming out of nowhere. And of course, the main question that's going through my mind is, what could she imagine it's worth? And up until that point, so let's say, so the 8 million was at that point, you know, 3 months before, the world record anybody ever paid for a ruby. But this stone was clearly worth so much more. And so I just, you know, in the end, I just sort of took a deep breath and I said, I don't know, I'd like to put an estimate of 16 to 24 million. And she looked at me with dead silence, you know, that awful silence made an offer and the person said, okay, and looks at you. Okay.
Just like that.
Yeah, yes, I'd already quoted double what anybody had ever paid for ruby before, and of course it ended up selling nearly 4 times. But what's so wonderful about the job is you never know what you're looking for. I know Steve must have the same thing, maybe not for $30 million, but for stones that you don't know what you're going to find, and that's the excitement, isn't it? To me, gemstones are way beyond just sort of monetary value. I mean, they speak, they have personalities, and we relate to them in a very profound way, and we always have. Steve, you'll remember being English. When I grew up, there was a little board game called Buccaneer.
Yep.
And that's what we need to get back again. Because as a boy of 7, you got your little boat, and you got to go to these islands, I remember. And on the island were these glass rubies and sapphires and so on. You fill up your boat and come home with it. And I think, my God, what's one? Because it was the idea of the treasure. And what we've got to do is got to get back to this idea of treasure, because it's central to most personalities. We all seek the treasure. And that's the wonderful thing. And Steve's absolutely right. We have to tell the story. We have to inspire people to want these wonderful things.
Thank you, David, for relaying your story in such a lovely way. Mr. Zion, over to you straight away. If you can please kindly share with your version, your tries with the colored stone, please, sir.
I don't know with which one to start.
And I'm pressed for time. Apologies, but you know they're harassing.
Okay, I'll make it quick. A few years ago, maybe 12, 13 years ago, one of my colored stone suppliers calls me up and tells me, listen, I have something very, very special to show you. So I asked him, what is it? He doesn't tell me the name. Is it a ruby? Is it a sapphire? No. I have something very special to show you. He catches a plane, comes to Hong Kong, comes to the office and shows me one of the most beautiful stones I've ever seen in my life. He shows me a neon green blue Paraíba, Brazilian Paraíba, that absolutely captivated me totally, because that was my favorite color. And I never knew what Paraíba was until then. Well, maybe it was 2006, 2007. And I heard about it, but I never saw one. But when I saw this stone, and I saw such a treasure of nature, I said to myself, I have to own it. So I asked him, how much is it? So I don't know whether he noticed that I was excited about the stone. Usually I'm very cool, and you can never see me getting excited over any stone. So he tells me a price, and I still thought, well, it was very reasonable considering that I like it, and it was a 14 karat size, an oval shape, a beauty, a gem. I said, I'm going to take a chance, and I bought it. I want you to know I bought it. I gave him an offer. I gave him a slight offer, less than what he asked. He accepted it immediately. I stayed with the stone. I didn't have any intention of selling it. Wow. And 2-3 years later, somebody came to my office, saw the stone. He grabbed it out of my hand and he said, "This stone is not in your place anymore." Whatever price I asked him, and I sold it.
Wow! Wow!
It's the most incredible stone. I think people are beginning to realize the value of Paraíba now, especially those that are coming from Brazil, and especially those that are non-heated, non-enhanced, which are so extreme, especially those that come from the Batala mine. Batala mine is almost exhausted. And this particular one was from the Batala mine, and I heard that the person who bought it from me sold it at 4 times the amount of money.
Wow, incredible.
I was very happy for him. So that's what's the beginning of my entry into the Paraíba business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ephraim. And like you said, our story, had it been, you must have sold or bought, millions of dollars of, ETF contracts in gold, but it's still that Paraíba that still holds in your memory. So this is our industry. And on that note, I'd really like to thank all our panelists for their insight and their thoughts. It's been truly amazing to hear your incredible stories, and thanks for sharing it with us. I'd also like to thank GJEPC Chairperson, Mr. Pramod Agarwal, for his leadership on COVID lockdown and the contribution to the Indian government on behalf of GJEPC. And lastly, our viewers for their time who've logged in from all different parts of the world. I wish you all the best and hope all of us get past behind this COVID situation at an earliest. Thank you once again, and the new way to greet and meet everyone from India.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shaun. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, well done.
Bye,
Rishabh.
Over to you, Nitin.
Nitin.
Closed. Leave the meeting.
Nitin.
Leave the meeting.
Another meeting.
Yeah. So we can close the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. All the best to you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Still long time, eh?
כן, היה מצוין, אני חושב שזה היה מצוין.